I'm Derek. Welcome to Intertwined Hearts. Subscribe, like, and share if you enjoy. Let's go. The sound of glass shattering against the wall echoed throughout the Greenwich mansion, but Trent Harrison didn't move. His ice-blue eyes remained fixed on Savannah, who trembled before him, silent tears streaming down her delicate face. 17 years of marriage were falling apart in a matter of minutes. "You have an hour to get your things," he said, his controlled voice masking the storm within. "The divorce agreement is on the kitchen table. Sign it before you leave." Savannah looked at the man she no longer recognized. The same man who, years ago, had promised eternal love in a small garden in Manhattan, now discarded it as an investment that had not yielded the expected profits. "Trent, please, can we talk about this?" His voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. The tiredness of the last few months weighed on every word, but he didn't realize it. "I never understood anymore." "Whitney's pregnant," he replied dryly, adjusting his $2,000 Hermes tie. 3 months. "And unlike you, she's going to give me a son." The words hit Savannah like a punch to the gut. Her failed attempts to get pregnant, the nights of silent crying, the treatments that never worked. They all played like a movie in her mind. The physical pain she had felt for months intensified, but she suppressed it, as she had done for so long. In the Italian marble kitchen, the divorce agreement awaited his signature. 50 pages of legal language that reduced his life to numbers and clauses. Savannah, who had abandoned a promising career as a corporate lawyer to support Trent's growing real estate empire, was now relegated to a minimal pension and the loss of nearly everything they had built together. Whitney Brooks, the 28-year-old executive assistant, had accomplished in a few months what Savannah had tried for years. The thought was bitter, but not as bitter as the secret he carried with him. The diagnosis he had received 6 months ago and which he had kept under lock and key. Climbing the solid oak stairs to the master bedroom, Savannah allowed herself a moment of weakness. Her legs wobbled, and she had to lean on the golden railing. Dr. Richardson had been clear about his condition. Without immediate aggressive treatment, his days were numbered. But how could she have told Trent when he was closing the biggest deal of his career? With shaking hands, Savannah began to gather some clothes and personal items. Old photos, letters, and memories of a life that now seemed to belong to someone else. In the closet, her eyes fell on the navy blue dress she had worn the day she met Trent, at a benefit in Boston. She had just graduated from Yale, full of dreams and ambitions. He was an up-and-coming realtor with a charming smile and close-ups. "The driver is waiting." Trent's voice sounded from the bedroom door, cold and professional as if he were closing another one of his multi-million-dollar transactions. Savannah nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. With mechanical gestures, he finished packing his belongings into 2 suitcases. There were surprisingly few things for a lifetime. In the kitchen, she paused in front of the divorce settlement. His years of legal training allowed him to perfectly understand every unfair clause, every attempt to minimize his participation in the construction of the Harrison empire. But she had neither the strength nor the will to fight. His signature on the document was quick and decisive. What Trent didn't know was that the money from the settlement already had a destination: the children's oncology ward at Greenwich Hospital. If his days were numbered, at least he would do something meaningful with what was left. "It's done," she said, rising from the dining table where they had shared so many meals. "I hope Whitney gives you everything you ever wanted, Trent." He didn't respond, busy checking whether the signature matched the document. Savannah picked up her bags and walked to the front door of the $12 million mansion she had called home for so long. The moment she crossed the threshold, a gust of cold autumn wind enveloped her, making her shiver. Or maybe it was the weight of knowing that I would never see that place, that man, that life again. The driver, Marcus, who had known her for more than a decade, tried to hide his tears as he put her bags in the trunk of the Mercedes. Savannah got into the back seat, her aching body protesting every movement. As the car drove away along the property's stone path, she didn't look back. He didn't see Trent standing at the office window, watching his departure with an unreadable expression. He didn't see Whitney arriving minutes later in his red Porsche, smiling triumphantly. What no one saw were the silent tears that finally fell when Savannah took out the latest test results from her pocket, where the words "advanced metastasis" seemed to scream from the page. In a matter of months, all the money from her divorce settlement would be transferred to the hospital, and she would leave knowing that her last act had been to turn her pain into hope for others. The Mercedes was heading towards a small apartment in the center of Greenwich, where Savannah would spend her final days. Autumn painted the trees red and gold, but to her, the world had lost all its colors. On the rooftop of the Harrison Business Center, Trent looked out over the city of Greenwich through floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of untouched 12-year-old whiskey in his hand. 2 weeks had passed since Savannah's departure, and the silence she left behind seemed more deafening every day. Whitney entered her office without knocking, as she always did now. Her high heels announced her presence long before she appeared, and Trent felt his shoulders tense involuntarily. "The council is waiting in the meeting room," she said, one hand resting on her still inconspicuous belly, "and the realtor called about the house on Martha's Vineyard. He needs an answer by tomorrow." Trent nodded mechanically, his thoughts still stuck on the image of Savannah leaving the mansion. There was something in her eyes that day, something beyond the pain of betrayal, that disturbed him more than he cared to admit. "Trent?" Whitney moved closer, her sweet scent invading his personal space. "Do you hear me?" "Yes, of course," he replied, adjusting his posture. "Tell the broker we will accept the offer." The house on Martha's Vineyard was a gift to Whitney, part of the new life she was trying to build. A life that, for some reason, seemed more and more like a house of cards about to collapse. In the boardroom, 12 executives awaited his presentation on the new development in downtown Boston. It was a $500 million project, the kind of deal that used to make your heart skip a beat. Today, however, the words came out of his mouth emotionlessly, as if he were reading a rehearsed script. "Mr. Harrison," interrupted Richard Coleman, one of the older investors, "you seem distant today. Is everything okay?" The question caught him off guard. Trent Harrison was never distant during a business meeting. He was known for his imposing presence, his ability to command a room with his charisma alone. But today, his mind kept going back to little moments from the past. Savannah making coffee on her late nights at work, her comforting smile after a hard day, the way she always knew exactly what to say when a deal went wrong. "Perfectly fine," he replied, forcing a professional smile. "Let's get on with the performance." After the meeting, Trent found himself driving aimlessly through the streets of Greenwich. His Bentley Continental took him unconsciously to the little cafe where he and Savannah used to have breakfast on Sundays. Through the window he saw their seat, a table in the corner next to the window, occupied by an elderly couple laughing over their cups of coffee. Her phone buzzed with a message from Whitney. "Dinner with the decorator at 8. Don't be late." He looked at the screen for a long moment before turning off the device completely. On the passenger seat, a folder caught his eye. It was Harrison Enterprises' quarterly report, which Savannah always reviewed before him. She had a keen eye for details he often missed, a legacy of her years as a lawyer. Now, looking at the pages of numbers and graphs, Trent realized how much depended on her, not just emotionally but professionally as well. Movement on the sidewalk caught his attention. A woman with brown hair who resembled Savannah walked slowly, leaning on a nurse's arm. For a moment her heart stopped, but she was just a stranger. Still, something about that scene deeply disturbed him. Deciding he needed air, Trent parked near Greenwich Harbor and walked to the pier. The place was practically deserted at this time of afternoon, the cold autumn wind keeping most people indoors. His hands found a small object in his pocket, Savannah's old wedding ring, which she had left on the kitchen table along with the signed agreement. "Mr. Harrison?" A familiar voice brought him out of his thoughts. It was Marcus, her driver, carrying shopping bags. "Marcus," Trent replied, noticing the employee's discomfort. "Something wrong?" The man hesitated, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "No, sir. I just didn't expect to find you here." There was something about the way Marcus avoided his gaze that piqued Trent's curiosity. "Have you seen Savannah?" The question seemed to catch the driver by surprise. "I shouldn't comment on that, sir." "Marcus, please." Trent was surprised by the pleading tone in his own voice. The driver sighed deeply. "She's not well, Mr. Harrison. That's all I can say." Before Trent could press for more information, Marcus hurriedly took his leave, leaving him alone with his growing doubts. The driver's words echoed in his mind, mixing with small details he had ignored in recent months. Savannah's constant tiredness, her frequent dentist appointments, the way she had lost weight. Back in the car, Trent found Whitney waiting in front of the office, her irritated expression making it clear that she had tried to call several times. But for the first time since they began their affair, he didn't feel the usual fascination with her youth and vitality. Instead, all I saw was a stranger using someone else's shoes. "Where were you?" Whitney demanded as soon as he got out of the car. "The decorator—" "Cancel," Trent interrupted, his voice firm. "Cancel everything." He needed to think, needed to understand what was happening. More than that, he needed to find out what Marcus wasn't telling him about Savannah. The feeling that something important had slipped through his fingers consumed him. And for the first time in weeks, Trent Harrison felt afraid of what he might discover. Dr. James Richardson was watching the rain through the window of his office at Greenwich Hospital when his phone rang. Trent Harrison's name flashing on the screen made her stomach drop. After 20 years of friendship, this would be the most difficult conversation they had ever had. "James, I need to see you now." Trent's voice sounded strained on the other end of the line. "It's about Savannah." The doctor closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the secret he was carrying. "Come to the hospital. I'll be in my office." 30 minutes later, Trent entered the room, his normally impeccable appearance showing signs of wear. His deep circles under his eyes and slightly loose tie revealed that the powerful businessman was losing the control he valued so much. "What's going on with Savannah?" Trent got straight to the point, sitting in the chair in front of his friend's desk. "Marcus said she's not doing well, and now I can't stop thinking about all the signs I ignored." James stood up, walking over to a file cabinet. With deliberately slow movements, he removed a folder marked with Savannah's name. "Before I show you this, I need you to understand that I'm breaking medical confidentiality because I believe you need to know, and because she won't make it much longer." Trent's face paled. "What are you talking about?" "Pancreatic cancer, terminal stage," James said, his professional voice masking the pain of delivering such news. "Diagnosed 8 months ago. She refused to start more aggressive treatment because she didn't want you to know. Said you were in the middle of the biggest deal of your life." Trent's world seemed to slow down. The doctor's words echoed in his mind as flashbacks of the past few months invaded his consciousness. Savannah sleeping more than usual, losing weight, making secret calls that he assumed were to a lover. 8 months? Trent whispered, his voice breaking. "All this time, and She's in the palliative care ward now," James continued, watching his friend break down. "The money from the divorce settlement? She donated it all to the children's oncology ward. I wanted her departure to have some meaning." Trent stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. His hands shook as he ran his fingers through his gray hair. "Which room?" "Trent, wait." James grabbed his arm. "She's very weak, and I'm not sure she wants to see you." "I need to see her." Trent's voice was filled with an emotion that James had never witnessed before. "Please." In room 507, Savannah lay next to the window, her fragile body almost disappearing between the hospital sheets. She watched a group of children playing in the therapeutic garden below, a small smile on her pale lips. When Trent entered the room, the silence that followed was deafening. Savannah turned slowly, her eyes, once so vibrant, now blurred from illness and medication. "You figured it out," she said simply, her voice just a whisper of what it used to be. Trent approached the bed, his legs barely supporting him. Up close, he could clearly see the ravages of the disease, the purple spots on his arms from the countless needles, the thinning hair, the yellowed skin. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice cracking. "You were about to close on the Boston project," Savannah replied, closing her eyes for a moment. "The one you dreamed about for years. And then, well, then you found your happiness with Whitney." The mention of his assistant's name made Trent feel nauseous. How could you be so blind, so selfish? "I'm so sorry," he whispered, falling to his knees beside the bed. "Savannah, I'm so sorry." "Don't be," she replied, reaching out a trembling hand to touch his face. "You gave me 17 wonderful years. And now you're going to have a child. It's all I ever wanted." Tears began to fall freely down Trent's face. He held Savannah's hand, frightened by her fragility. How did you not notice? How could he be so absorbed in himself that he didn't see the woman he loved, wasting away before his eyes? "The kids," Savannah continued, looking out the window again. "They are so brave, fighting every day, smiling even when it hurts. The divorce money will help them have a better chance." Trent followed her gaze, watching the children in the garden. Some carried probes, others wore masks, but they all shared a resilience he never understood until now. "I'll double the donation," he said suddenly. "No, I'm going to triple it. We're going to build the best children's oncology ward in the country." A faint smile lit up Savannah's face. Always the businessman, right? Always thinking big. "I learned from you," he replied, kissing her hand softly. "You always saw the best in me, even when I didn't deserve it." A nurse entered the room, carrying a tray of medicines. "Mrs. Harrison, it's time for your medication." "Harrison?" Trent asked, noticing that she was still using his last name. "Some papers haven't been processed yet," Savannah replied with a small smile, but they both knew the real reason. The nurse began administering the medications, and Trent watched helplessly as Savannah's eyes began to feel heavy. Before falling asleep, she lightly squeezed his hand. "Don't waste your second chance, Trent," she murmured. "Be the man I know you can be." As Savannah fell asleep, Trent remained by her side, holding her hand and silently promising that he would do everything differently. The distant sound of children's laughter in the garden mixed with the constant beeping of monitors, creating a bittersweet symphony of life and death, love and regret, beginnings and endings. Trent left the hospital that night with the weight of the world on his shoulders. The sky over Greenwich had darkened, and a light rain was beginning to fall, reflecting his mood. Instead of going back to the mansion where Whitney was waiting for him, he drove to the empty Harrison Enterprises office. In the silence of the 30th floor, he sat in his Italian leather executive chair and swiveled to face the illuminated city. Each point of light represented a life, a story, while the woman he truly loved languished in a hospital bed because of him. His phone vibrated incessantly, 15 missed calls from Whitney. The last message said, "Where are you? We have the ultrasound tomorrow." The ultrasound. Physical proof of his betrayal, of the future he had chosen at the expense of destroying his past. With shaking hands, Trent opened the bottom drawer of his desk, pulling out a bottle of whiskey and a photo album that Savannah kept in her office. The first photo showed the two of them at their Yale graduation, she beaming in her gown, him proud by her side. At the time, Savannah was the rising star of corporate law, while he was still struggling to establish his first development company. "You gave up everything for me," he murmured to the photo, pouring himself a generous helping. "And how did I repay you?" Flipping through the album, each image was a stab in his chest. The simple wedding at the Manhattan Botanical Garden, where they promised eternal love. The opening of the first Harrison development, with Savannah cutting the ribbon alongside it. Christmas parties, birthdays, everyday moments that now seemed like lost treasures. An envelope fell out of the album. It was an old letter that Savannah had written during her first major financial crisis, when they almost lost everything. "My love, I know you're scared. The market has crashed, investors are nervous, But I want you to know that I believe in you. I always believed. You have the vision and determination to turn this difficult time into a new beginning. I will be by your side as I always have been. Forever yours, Savannah. The letter was stained with coffee and wrinkled at the edges, signs that it had been read and reread countless times. Trent remembered that period. He slept just 3 hours a night, fighting to save the company. And Savannah was there, making coffee, reviewing contracts, keeping him sane. A fit of fury overcame him. With a sudden movement, he swept everything off his desk, sending papers, laptop, and picture frames to the floor. The sound of glass breaking echoed through the empty office, but it wasn't enough to drown out the scream of anguish that escaped his throat. His cell phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from Marcus, the driver. "Mr. Harrison, I thought you should know. Mrs. Harrison has taken a turn for the worse. The doctors are with her now." Trent stood up so quickly that his chair tipped backwards. In the elevator, his fingers drummed nervously as the floors passed with agonizing slowness. His mind was a whirlwind of memories and regrets. In the parking lot, he found Whitney waiting by his car. "Where have you been? I've been looking for you for hours," she demanded, her shrill voice cutting through the silence of the night. "Not now, Whitney," Trent replied, trying to get past her. "Not now? I'm carrying your child." She grabbed his arm. "You have responsibilities." Trent stopped, slowly turning to face her. For the first time, he saw Whitney for who she really was. Young, ambitious, manipulative. A distorted version of what Savannah represented. "My wife is dying," he said, his voice filled with an eerie calm. "The woman who dedicated 17 years of her life to me is in a hospital bed, fighting for every breath, because I was too selfish to realize she was sick. So no, Whitney, not now." "Your wife?" Whitney laughed bitterly. "You signed the divorce papers, Trent. I'm your future now." "No," he replied, gently removing her hand from his arm. "You are my biggest mistake." Leaving Whitney gaping in the parking lot, Trent got into his car and sped toward the hospital. The streets of Greenwich blurred by as his mind worked out plans. Lawyers he needed to contact, documents he needed to reverse, a lifetime of mistakes he needed to try to fix in the little time he had left. At the hospital, Dr. Richardson was waiting for him in the hallway of the palliative care ward. His grave face said everything Trent needed to know. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Days, maybe hours," James replied, placing a comforting hand on his friend's shoulder. "She's asking for you." In room 507, Savannah seemed even smaller than she had a few hours ago. The heart monitors showed an irregular rhythm, and his breathing was shallow, but when Trent walked in, his eyes opened, and a small smile lit up his face. "You're back," she whispered. "I should never have left," he replied, sitting down next to you and holding your hand. "Savannah, I need to tell you." "Shh," she interrupted him softly. "I already know everything I need to know. You're here now." In that moment, watching the woman who had been his safe haven for nearly 2 decades, Trent Harrison finally understood the true meaning of love. It wasn't about possessions, success, or heirs. It was about being present, about sacrifice, about putting others first. And he had failed all of those lessons. Dawn found Trent still at Savannah's bedside in room 507. He had spent the entire night watching over her fitful sleep, watching each shallow breath as if it were his last. Dr. Richardson's words echoed in his mind. Days, perhaps hours. A nurse quietly entered to change the IV and check his vitals. His movements were soft, almost reverent, as if he understood the gravity of the moment unfolding in that room. She cast a pitying glance at Trent, noticing his loose tie and rumpled suit. "Mr. Harrison," she whispered, "may I bring you some coffee?" He shook his head, his eyes never leaving Savannah's pale face. How could he think about coffee when every second with her was too precious to waste? His phone vibrated for the 100th time. More messages from Whitney, his lawyer, board members. The world outside continued to spin, indifferent to the drama unfolding within those hospital walls. With a decisive movement, Trent turned off the device. "Remember our first apartment in Manhattan?" he murmured to the sleeping Savannah. "That tiny studio on the Lower East Side with the window that wouldn't close properly and the neighbor who played the saxophone at 3 in the morning?" A faint smile appeared on Savannah's lips, her eyes still closed. "And you promised that one day you would give me a palace." "Were you awake?" Trent asked, gently squeezing her hand. "In and out," she replied, her voice no more than a whisper. "That apartment. We were so happy there." "Yes, we were," he agreed, feeling tears burn his eyes. "Before money, before the Harrison Empire, before I became this." Savannah opened her eyes with effort, her gaze meeting his. "You're not a bad person, Trent. You just lost your way." A knock on the door interrupted the moment. Dr. Richardson entered, accompanied by a medical team. Their serious faces told a story that no one wanted to hear. "We need to run some tests," James explained gently. "Trent, why don't you grab some coffee? It'll take about an hour." Reluctantly, Trent left the room. In the hallway, his legs automatically carried him to the children's oncology ward, Savannah's last legacy. Through an observation window, he saw children in various stages of treatment. Some played with volunteers, others slept exhausted after chemotherapy. "Mr. Harrison?" a voice called him. It was Marcus carrying a small stuffed bear. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" "I come every morning," the driver replied. "Mrs. Harrison asked me to bring toys for the children. She said no child should face cancer without a stuffed friend." The simplicity and depth of the gesture hit him like a punch in the gut. Even though she was facing her own battle, Savannah was thinking about others. Meanwhile, he had spent the last few months preoccupied with mergers, acquisitions, and a fling with his assistant. "Marcus," Trent called as the driver turned to leave. "Why did you keep helping her after what I did?" The man stopped, carefully considering his words. "Because Mrs. Harrison taught me that kindness doesn't require reciprocity, sir. She continued to be kind, even when the world wasn't kind to her." Back in room 507, Trent found Savannah looking paler than before, if that were possible. Dr. Richardson awaited him with results that were not surprising, but still devastating. "The organs are starting to fail," the doctor explained in a low voice. "I suggest you use this time to say goodbye," Trent added, his voice breaking. James nodded solemnly before leaving the room. Trent returned to his position at the side of the bed, taking Savannah's fragile hand in his. "Hey," she murmured, her eyes slowly opening. "You look terrible." A choked laugh escaped his lips. "Always worried about me, aren't you?" "Someone does," she replied with a small smile. "Trent, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't waste your life in bitterness and guilt," Savannah said, each word seeming to cost her precious energy. "Learn from this, be better, and take care of the kids here. They need someone to fight for them. I will turn this ward into the best pediatric oncology center in the country," he promised, tears streaming freely down his face. "It will be your legacy." "No," she corrected softly. "It will be our fresh start, your chance to make a difference." A comfortable silence fell over them, broken only by the soft beeping of monitors and the distant sound of children laughing in the hallway. Trent watched the morning sun paint golden shadows on his bedroom walls, thinking about all the sunrises he'd wasted chasing the wrong things. "Savannah," he began, his voice shaking. "I love you. I always have. Forgive me for forgetting this along the way." She squeezed his hand lightly, her eyes closing again. "I know, my love. I know." The metallic sound of the elevator announced Whitney's arrival at the executive office of Harrison Enterprises. She found the room in complete chaos, scattered papers, broken glass, and the lingering smell of whiskey in the air. On Trent's desk, the photo album remained open, revealing memories of a life she had helped destroy. His fingers skimmed over a particular photograph, Trent and Savannah at a fundraiser 3 years ago. Her smile was radiant as he looked at her with an adoration he never directed at Whitney. The executive assistant slammed the album shut, her hand instinctively landing on the small bulge on her stomach. "Miss Brooks," the voice of Patricia, the senior secretary, interrupted his thoughts. "The board is requesting an emergency meeting. Mr. Harrison has not been answering calls for 48 hours. Whitney adjusted her Chanel blazer, trying to maintain her composure. "Tell them that Mr. Harrison is indisposed for personal reasons." "They know about Mrs. Harrison," Patricia replied, her tone carrying a note of disapproval. The news spread quickly. At Greenwich Hospital, Trent watched the sunrise through the window of room 507, his back aching after another night in the uncomfortable hospital chair. Savannah's heart monitor kept its rhythm irregular, each beep reminding him of the precious time slipping through his fingers. "Mr. Harrison?" A young nurse entered the room silently. "There's a girl from the pediatric ward asking about Mrs. Harrison. Lily, the little one who always got books from her." Trent blinked in surprise. "Books?" "His wife came 3 times a week to read to the children undergoing treatment," the nurse explained. "Even when I was at my weakest. I said stories were the best medicine for the soul." The revelation hit Trent like a physical blow. While he spent his days in endless meetings and nights with Whitney, Savannah dedicated her last strength to bringing comfort to unknown children. Can I meet Lily?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The nurse nodded, leaving briefly before returning with a girl of approximately 8 years old. Lily wore a colorful scarf on her head and carried a worn-out The Little Prince book. "Hi," she said shyly. "Miss Savannah promised to finish reading this chapter with me." Trent felt his heart tighten. "She's sleeping now, but maybe I can read to you." Lily considered the offer for a moment before nodding. He sat down on the other chair in the room and handed the book to Trent. He opened to the marked page and began reading, his initially hesitant voice gaining confidence as the story unfolded. "The essential is invisible to the eye." He read the famous passage, the words taking on new meaning. "You can only see well with your heart." A gentle movement in the hospital bed caught his attention. Savannah had opened her eyes and was watching the scene with a faint smile. "You've always had a beautiful voice for stories," she whispered. Lily jumped up from her chair, approaching the bed. "Miss Savannah, I missed you." "Me too, sweetheart," Savannah replied, reaching out a shaky hand to touch the girl's face. "I see you've met my husband." "He reads almost as well as you," Lily said with childish seriousness. A nurse appeared at the door, indicating that it was time for Lily's treatment. The girl carefully hugged Savannah before leaving the book behind. "You never told me about the readings," Trent said softly. "There was a lot you didn't ask," Savannah replied without recrimination. "The children, they taught me so much about courage, about living each moment fully." "Teach me," he begged, holding her hand. "Teach me to be better, Savannah. It's not too late, is it?" She studied him for a long moment, her green eyes still bright despite her illness. "It's never too late to change, Trent. But change needs to come from the heart, not guilt." In the hallway, Dr. Richardson was speaking in hushed tones to medical staff. Through the bedroom window, Trent could see their serious expressions, their worried gestures. Time was running out. "Savannah," he began, his voice shaking. "About Whitney." "No," she interrupted him gently. "Let's not waste our time on this. Your son will need you, Trent. Be the father you always wanted to be." "How can you be so generous?" he asked, tears streaming down his face. "After everything I've done?" "Because true love doesn't keep records of mistakes," she replied, her eyes closing wearily. "I just hope you learn to love like this too." The soft sound of The Little Prince falling to the floor echoed through the room. Trent bent down to pick it up, noticing a dedication on the first page written in Savannah's elegant handwriting. "To the brave souls of the children's ward, never forget, the most beautiful stories are those written with love. With love, Savannah Harrison." In that moment, watching his wife fall asleep again, Trent Harrison finally understood the true meaning of legacy. It wasn't the skyscrapers he built or the fortunes he amassed, but the hearts we touched and the lives we transformed. And he had wasted 17 years learning that lesson. In the financial heart of Manhattan, the Harrison Enterprises boardroom buzzed with tension. 12 council members waited impatiently, their expressions ranging from concern to irritation. Whitney Brooks occupied the chair at the head of the table, her impeccable blazer and rigid posture trying to mask her growing desperation. "Gentlemen," she began, "as you can see from the quarterly reports—" "Where's Trent Harrison?" interrupted Richard Coleman, the most senior member of the board. 3 days without communication is unacceptable, especially with the Boston project at a crucial stage. Whitney took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the eyes on her. "Mr. Harrison is dealing with a delicate family situation." "You mean he's in the hospital with his cheating wife?" said Margaret Chen, chief financial officer. "The same wife who donated millions to the children's oncology ward?" The silence that followed was deafening. Whitney felt her face burn, her hand unconsciously resting on her slightly protruding belly. At Greenwich Hospital, the source of all this corporate turmoil remained oblivious to the turmoil it was causing. Trent watched Savannah sleep, his fingers intertwined with hers, memorizing every detail of her face. The last 72 hours had been a roller coaster of emotions, with moments of lucidity alternating with increasingly longer periods of deep sleep. "Mr. Harrison," a soft voice called. It was Lily, the little pediatric oncology patient, standing in the doorway with a drawing in her hands. "Come in, Lily," he invited, adjusting himself in the chair. "What do you have there?" The girl approached timidly, holding out the paper. It was a colorful drawing showing 3 figures, a woman with angel wings, a man in a suit, and a bald girl with a big smile. "It's Ms. Savannah, you and me," Lily explained. "The nurse said Ms. Savannah is going to be an angel soon." Trent felt his throat tighten. "It's a really pretty drawing, Lily. I'm sure she'll love it." "Mr. Harrison," the girl continued, her voice small, "when Mrs. Savannah becomes an angel, will you still read us stories?" The innocent question hit Trent like a bolt of lightning. Amid all the emotional chaos of the last few days, he hadn't realized the broader impact that Savannah had created, an entire community of little warriors who depended on her love and dedication. "I will, Lily," he promised, realizing every word was true. "I will continue the work she started." On the other side of the glass, Dr. Richardson watched the scene with a mixture of sadness and hope. In his 30 years of medicine, he had rarely witnessed a transformation as profound as Trent Harrison's. "James," called a weak voice from the bed. Savannah had woken up and was signaling for the doctor to come in. "How are you feeling?" James asked, checking the monitors. "Like someone about to go on a big trip," she replied with a small smile. "I need you to promise me something." "Anything, Savannah." "Take care of him after I'm gone," she whispered, looking lovingly at Trent, who was now showing Lily how to make origami with drawing paper. "He's going to need real friends." James held his hand, noticing how cold it was. "You always thinking about others." "It's what's kept me alive until now," she replied. Love was never about receiving, James. It was always about giving." In the hospital hallway, Whitney appeared hesitantly, her presence causing a stir among the nurses. She stopped in front of room 507, watching through the glass the scene unfolding. Trent, Lily, and Savannah, a small makeshift family sharing a precious moment. "He won't want to see you now." The voice of Marcus, the driver, sounded from behind her. Whitney turned around, surprised. "You don't understand. The board is panicking. The investors are nervous. He needs to come back." "No," Marcus replied calmly. "You don't understand. He's finally where he's supposed to be." Inside the room, Savannah beckoned Trent closer, her voice just a whisper. "Remember our first dance? On the roof of that building under construction?" "How could I forget?" he replied, smiling through his tears. "You were so scared of heights, but you trusted me." "I've always trusted," she said, her eyes shining with distant memories. Even when you've lost confidence in yourself. Lily watched the interaction with childlike curiosity, her little heart somehow understanding the depth of the moment she was witnessing. She picked up her favorite book and, without being asked, began to read aloud. But the eyes are blind. You have to search with your heart. The little prince's words floated around the room like a blessing, weaving a blanket of peace over its occupants. At that moment, all the board meetings, billion-dollar projects, and corporate dramas seemed insignificant compared to the simplicity and truth of those words. Trent Harrison, the titan of real estate, had finally found his true north, not in the skyscrapers he built, but in the legacy of love his wife would leave behind. The morning at Greenwich Hospital brought with it a subtle change in the atmosphere of room 507. The soft rays of the autumn sun illuminated Savannah's face as she slept restlessly, while Trent organized a stack of documents on the small side table. "Mr. Harrison?" called Dr. Richardson from the door. "Do you have a minute?" Trent nodded, following the doctor into the hallway. His tired eyes and wrinkled suit showed the nights he slept poorly in the uncomfortable hospital chair. "The latest test results are back," James began, his professional voice masking the pain of delivering bad news to a friend. "The metastasis has spread faster than we anticipated. We're talking hours now, not days." Trent felt his legs weaken, leaning against the hallway wall. "I need to do something, James. There must be experts, experimental treatments." "Trent," the doctor interrupted gently. "She made her decision months ago when she refused aggressive treatment. Now all we can do is make sure she's comfortable." Across the hall, Whitney emerged from the elevator, carrying a folder of documents. Her high heels echoed on the hospital floor as she approached determinedly. "Trent, the council is in an uproar," she began without preamble. "The Boston project—" "Not now, Whitney," Trent cut in, his voice carrying an authority that made her take a step back. "You don't understand," she insisted, lowering her voice. "Investors are threatening to withdraw support. 3 days without communication is—" "No," Trent interrupted her again, turning to face her fully. "You don't understand. I spent 17 years putting business before everything, before love, compassion, humanity. Look where that got me." Whitney instinctively touched her belly, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Dr. Richardson. The doctor observed the scene with clinical interest, noting how his friend's priorities had changed drastically in the last few days. "The baby," Whitney began, but Trent stopped her with a gesture. "I will assume my responsibilities to the child," he declared firmly. "But don't confuse this with a life together, Whitney. What we had was a very costly mistake." At that moment, a commotion coming from room 507 caught everyone's attention. Lily, the little oncology patient, had snuck in and was now holding Savannah's hand, who had woken up. "Continue the story, Mrs. Savannah," the girl asked softly. "I want to know if the prince finds his rose." Trent quickly returned to the room, followed by Dr. Richardson. Whitney remained in the hallway, watching through the glass as her carefully planned world fell apart. "The rose," Savannah murmured, her voice weak but full of affection, "was unique in the universe. Not because she was the most beautiful, but because she was loved." Lily smiled, adjusting her colorful headscarf. "Like you and Mr. Harrison?" A sad smile passed across Savannah's lips. "Yes, darling. Sometimes love makes us unique, even when we're not perfect." Trent sat on the other side of the bed, taking Savannah's free hand in his. The contrast between his tanned skin and her pale fingers was painful to watch. "Remember when we got lost in Vermont?" Savannah asked suddenly, her eyes gaining a distant glow. "The GPS stopped working and we ended up in that small town. Woodstock," Trent added, smiling at the memory. "You insisted it was destiny, that we should buy that farmhouse for sale. And you said it was a bad investment." She laughed softly, the sound punctuated by a small cough. "Always the businessman." Dr. Richardson discreetly checked the monitors, his expression becoming more serious. Savannah's vital signs were starting to fluctuate more frequently. "Lily, darling," a nurse called from the door. "It's time for your treatment." The girl reluctantly let go of Savannah's hand, but not before leaving her favorite drawing on the side table. "So you don't forget us when you become an angel," she whispered. When they were alone, Savannah turned her eyes to Trent. "Promise me you'll buy that house in Woodstock." "What?" he asked, surprised by the unexpected request. "The farmhouse. Turn it into a healing place for children," she explained, each word taking visible effort. "A refuge where they can just be children, away from hospitals and treatments." Trent felt tears burn his eyes. Even now, in the last hours of her life, Savannah was thinking about how to help others. "I'll do it," he promised, kissing her hand softly. "I'm going to transform that place into something special, something that honors his legacy." From the hallway, Whitney watched the scene for a few more moments before leaving silently, her high heels no longer echoing in the hospital hallways. She finally understood that she had lost not just a battle, but a war that should never have started. Dr. Richardson made a few more notes on his clipboard, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what the next few hours would bring. In his 30 years of medicine, he had rarely witnessed a farewell as profoundly transformative as this one. "James," Savannah called softly. "Take care of him for me?" The doctor approached the bed, nodding solemnly. "Always, my friend. Always." The afternoon sun was beginning to decline, painting room 507 with golden hues. In the hallway, the voices of the oncology children echoed distantly, reminding everyone that, even in the darkest moments, life continues its inexorable cycle. Dusk in Greenwich painted the sky with shades of purple as Whitney Brooks sat alone in her Porsche in the hospital parking lot, her hands shaking on the Italian leather steering wheel. The folder with the Boston Project documents lay forgotten on the passenger seat, a bitter reminder of how his ambitions had turned to ashes. His phone vibrated. It was Richard Coleman again, the 14th unanswered call in the last 2 hours. Whitney watched the screen flicker on and off, thinking about how her life had become an elaborate house of cards, and now each floor was collapsing in sequence. In room 507, Trent remained next to Savannah, who had fallen asleep again, the rhythmic sound of heart monitors filling the silence like a merciless metronome, marking every precious moment that remained. "Mr. Harrison?" a soft voice called. It was Marcus, the driver, carrying a small wooden box. "I found this in Mrs. Harrison's apartment when I went to pick up some things she asked for." Trent immediately recognized the box. It was where Savannah kept her most precious memories. With careful hands, he opened it, finding dozens of small souvenirs of their life together. Theater tickets, postcards, photographs yellowed with age. At the bottom of the box, an envelope caught his eye. Inside, a letter dated 6 months ago when the initial diagnosis had been made. "My beloved Trent, if you are reading this, it means you have finally discovered the truth. I don't blame you for not noticing my illness. You were always so focused on your dreams, on building something great. It was one of the things that made me fall in love with you. I chose not to tell you about the cancer, because I saw how the Boston Project consumed you. It was his decades-long dream, and I couldn't be the reason it failed. Maybe it was selfish of me, but I preferred to carry this burden alone. When I found out about Whitney, part of me wanted to scream the truth, to use my illness as an anchor to keep you. But what kind of love would that be? You deserve more than pity or blame. The house in Woodstock, the one you said was a bad investment. I bought it. I used my personal savings, those I saved from my years as a lawyer. It's in the name of the foundation I created for children with cancer. My last gift to them, and to you. Because I know, my love, that you will find your way back. Not to me. It will be too late for that. But to the person you really are. The man I met at that party in Boston, who dreamed not just of skyscrapers, but of making a difference in the world. Forgive yourself, Trent. I forgave him a long time ago. With eternal love, Savannah. The words blurred before her teary eyes. On the bed, Savannah moved restlessly, her slender fingers lightly pressing the hospital sheet. She planned everything, Marcus commented softly. Every detail of the foundation, every aspect of the house. He said it would be his legacy of love. In the hallway, Dr. Richardson spoke in hushed tones to a team of nurses. Savannah's vital signs were becoming increasingly unstable, and they braced themselves for the inevitable. Lily appeared at the door again, this time accompanied by other children from the cancer ward. Each carried a drawing or a letter for Savannah. "Can we come in?" Lily asked shyly. "We want to say goodbye." Trent nodded, unable to speak. The children entered silently, forming a semicircle around the bed, their young faces scarred by the battle against cancer, but their eyes shining with love and gratitude. Savannah opened her eyes, a faint smile lighting up her face at the sight of her little warriors. "My angels," she whispered. "We brought gifts," announced a boy no more than 6 years old, holding up his drawing. "So you don't forget us in heaven." One by one, the children approached to give their gifts and give Savannah one last hug. Every gesture, every childish word carried a wisdom that transcended their ages. In the parking lot, Whitney finally made her decision. Picking up his phone, he dialed Richard Coleman's number. "Richard? Yes, it's me. Tell the board they can look for a new executive assistant. I'm resigning." His hand rested on his belly. Some choices, she realized, were bigger than ambition or power. Some choices defined not just who we were, but who we wanted our children to become. Back in room 507, the children were gone, leaving behind an almost tangible atmosphere of peace. Trent held Savannah's hand, feeling how cold it was. "The letter," she murmured, her eyes meeting his. "You found it." "Why didn't you tell me about the house?" he asked softly. "Because some things we need to figure out for ourselves," she replied, her voice just a whisper. "You're going to do something beautiful with it. I know you will." Dr. Richardson entered quietly, checking the monitors. His serious face said everything that needed to be said. The moment was coming. "Trent," Savannah called, gathering her last strength. "Promise you'll remember how to love. Not just the kids or the foundation, but yourself too." He nodded, tears running freely down his face. "I promise," he whispered, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "I promise, my love." On the 10th floor of Greenwich Hospital, news of Whitney Brooks' dismissal spread quickly among the staff. The nurses exchanged meaningful glances as they passed room 507, where Trent Harrison stood faithfully at Savannah's side, his fingers intertwined with hers as if he could anchor her life through that touch. Dr. Richardson entered the room with a serious expression, carrying the latest test results. "Trent, can I talk to you for a moment?" In the hallway, the doctor explained in a low voice. "The organs are going into multiple failure. We need to discuss comfort options now." "How long?" Trent asked, his voice hoarse. "Hours, maybe less," James replied, placing a comforting hand on his friend's shoulder. "She's fighting bravely, but—" A buzz from the pediatric ward interrupted the conversation. Lily and the other children had organized a little musical performance for Savannah. With permission from the doctors and nurses, they gathered in the hallway, holding colorful signs and softly singing "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." Savannah woke up at the sound, a faint smile lighting up her pale face. "My little warriors," she whispered. Trent returned to the room, sitting next to her. On the side table, the memory box was open, revealing fragments of a shared life. Yellowed theater tickets, postcards from trips never taken, dreams interrupted by time and circumstance. "The house in Woodstock," Savannah murmured, her eyes fixed on an old photograph of the property. "Promise you'll turn it into something special." "I already have plans," Trent replied, holding your hand gently. "It will be a refuge for children undergoing treatment, a place where they can forget about hospitals and just be children." In the hallway, Marcus was talking in a low voice with a hospital social worker. The driver had become more than an employee in recent weeks. He was a silent guardian of Savannah's last wishes. "The foundation is legally established," he explained. Mrs. Harrison took care of all the details before all this started. A nurse came in to check vitals, her expression softening when she saw the children still singing in the hallway. "They love her so much," he commented softly. "She taught them about courage," Trent replied, watching as Savannah smiled at every little face that appeared in the doorway. "About facing fear with grace." The sound of Trent's phone momentarily broke the atmosphere. It was Richard Coleman again, but this time the message was different. The board had unanimously approved the creation of a special wing at the new Boston complex dedicated to treating children with cancer. "See?" Savannah whispered, having overheard the conversation. "Sometimes we need to lose everything to find our true purpose." Trent felt tears burn his eyes. How could she think of others even now? How could I turn every moment of pain into a lesson in love? In the hospital parking lot, Whitney watched the sunset from her car, one hand resting on her belly. She had just signed papers transferring her interest in the Boston project to the new Savannah Foundation. It was his own act of redemption, an attempt to balance the scales of karma. Back in room 507, Savannah asked to see the Woodstock house plan one last time. Trent opened the folder Marcus had brought, showing the preliminary plans she had developed in secret during her final months. "See?" she pointed with a trembling finger. "The therapeutic garden here, and the library there. Each child will have their own space to dream." Dr. Richardson entered again, checking the monitors with a worried expression. Savannah's vital signs were getting weaker and weaker. "Trent," she called, her voice just a whisper. "Promise you'll remember to love, not just work, not just success." "I promise," he replied, kissing her hand softly. "I promise your legacy will live on through every life we touch." In the hallway, Lily and the other children had begun making origami, paper birds that symbolized hope and freedom. They hung them on a makeshift mobile, creating a garden of dreams suspended in the air. "The kids," Savannah smiled, watching the little birds dance in the breeze from the air conditioning. "They always knew the secret." "What secret?" Trent asked, leaning closer. "That love is the only thing we take with us," she replied, her eyes slowly closing. "It's the only thing we truly leave behind." The sun was setting in Greenwich, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In room 507, Trent Harrison held his wife's hand, while in the hallway, a makeshift orchestra of little warriors sang softly about rainbows and dreams that come true. It was a moment of farewell, but also of promise. The promise that love, in its purest and most selfless form, had the power to transform not just hearts, but entire destinies. The digital clock in room 507 read 3:47 a.m. when Trent woke up with a start in the hospital chair. For a panicked moment, he thought he had fallen asleep at the crucial moment. But the soft sound of Savannah's breathing reassured him. She was still there, fighting. In the silent hospital corridor, only the distant noise of medication carts and the occasional murmur of nurses broke the early morning stillness. Dr. Richardson had gone home at Savannah's insistence, promising to return at the first rays of the sun. "You should get some rest," a weak voice whispered. Savannah watched him with half-closed eyes, a small smile playing on her pale lips. "I'm right here," Trent replied, adjusting himself in the chair and holding her hand more firmly. "Besides, who else is going to control your medication cocktail?" It was an old joke between them, reminiscent of the times when Savannah used to joke about her controlling nature. Now, the irony of the situation was not lost on either of them. He, who always wanted to control everything, was powerless in the face of the inevitable. A night nurse, Angela, quietly came in to check vitals. His movements were precise and gentle, the result of years of caring for terminally ill patients. "I brought you some chamomile tea," she offered, placing 2 steaming cups on the side table. "Remember our first date?" Savannah asked suddenly, her voice carrying a surprising clarity for that time of night. "That horrible cafe in Boston?" "The little corner," Trent added, smiling at the memory. You spilled coffee on my incorporation proposal. And you were furious. She laughed softly, the sound punctuated by a small cough. But then you grabbed a napkin and started redesigning the entire project, he continued. It pointed out 3 critical flaws that I hadn't noticed. That's when you realized you needed me, Savannah teased, her eyes shining with distant memories. Not just professionally, Trent admitted, his voice cracking. You always saw beyond the glass and steel facades. You saw the heart behind the projects. At the nurse's station, Angela discreetly observed the couple while updating the medical records. In her 15 years of oncology nursing, she had witnessed countless goodbyes, but something about this was different. It was a story of redemption unfolding before her eyes. The Woodstock house plans, Savannah murmured, her fingers lightly squeezing Trent's hand. There's something I haven't shown you before. Trent reached for the folder on the side table, opening it carefully. Among the technical drawings and specifications, he found an envelope he hadn't noticed before. Inside, a series of hand-drawn sketches, delicate details of a sensory garden, a circular library with mountain views, themed bedrooms for children. You planned all of this while you were sick, he realized, admiring the precise lines that recalled the times when she worked on her legal projects. Each child will have their own space to dream, Savannah explained, her breathing becoming more labored. The garden. The flowers change with the seasons, like life. And the library. Circulate like time, Trent added, finally understanding the depth of his vision. No beginning or end, just stories that continue. Movement at the door caught his attention. It was Marcus, arriving for his self-assigned shift of morning watch. The driver had become a constant presence, a silent guardian of the couple's last moments. I brought something Mrs. Harrison asked for, he said softly, handing over a small package wrapped in brown paper. Savannah smiled when she recognized the package. Open up, she asked Trent. Inside was an old book of poetry, its pages marked by colorful post-its and notes in the margins. It was the same book she carried in her bag the day they met. For the children, she explained, her voice just a whisper. Each marked poem, a different lesson about love and courage. Trent flipped through the pages, noticing how each entry revealed a piece of Savannah's soul, her wisdom, her compassion, her infinite ability to transform pain into beauty. You never stopped teaching, did you? He asked, remembering how she had abandoned her plans to teach law to support her career. I just changed classrooms, she replied with a tired smile. Now my lessons are about life, not law. The sky was starting to lighten slightly, a shade of dark blue replacing the black of night. In the hospital garden, the first birds began their morning song, a melody that gently penetrated through the window of room 507. Trent, Savannah called, her voice weaker now. Promise that you will read each poem to them, that you will explain how words can heal. I promise, he replied, kissing your hand gently. Every word, every lesson. His legacy will live on through them. Angela returned for another check, her professional expression masking her excitement as she saw his increasingly weak vital signs. Marcus stood in the doorway, a silent sentinel of the love he witnessed. The book of poetry rested open on the table, a page marked with red ink drawing attention. Trent read in a low voice, Love is not measured in time, but in transformations, in lives touched, in renewed hearts. The first ray of sunlight came through the window of room 507, illuminating Savannah's serene face. Trent had spent the last few hours reading the poems marked in the old book, his voice occasionally cracking with emotion. Marcus remained at his silent post near the door, while Angela made her regular checks with the discretion of someone who intimately knew the dance between life and death. The library in Woodstock, Savannah whispered, her eyes fixed on a distant point beyond the window. I want each shelf to tell a different story. Trent adjusted himself in the chair, still holding her hand. Like this? The shelves. Must be like chapters, she explained, her voice weak but determined. Literature to dream, science to discover, art to create. Each section a new world for kids to explore. Dr. Richardson entered the room, his footsteps soft against the hospital floor. After examining the monitors, he exchanged a meaningful look with Angela. Savannah's vital signs continued to deteriorate, but her lucidity remained remarkable. Lily is asking if she can come in, the doctor informed softly. She has her first treatment of the day in an hour. Savannah nodded slightly, a smile lighting up her pale face. The little warrior entered the room, carrying yet another drawing. This time, a colorful representation of the Woodstock house as she imagined it, with a rainbow connecting the hospital to the refuge. This is how it's going to be, Lily explained, showing the drawing. A magical place where you can forget you're sick. Trent felt his throat tighten as he took in the childish details of the drawing. Heart-shaped windows, a garden filled with smiling flowers, and little figures of children playing under the rainbow. Perfect, Savannah murmured, her fingers delicately tracing the colored lines. Exactly as I dreamed. In the hallway, Whitney appeared unexpectedly, her heels replaced by silent flats. She carried a thick folder of documents, her face marked by an expression of determination mixed with regret. "Mr. Harrison," she called softly from the door. "Can I have a moment?" Trent hesitated, his eyes never leaving Savannah, who nodded slightly. In the hallway, Whitney opened her briefcase, revealing carefully organized legal documents. "I transferred all my shares in the Boston project to the foundation," she explained, her voice controlled. "And there's more. I got 5 of the biggest investors to agree to donate a significant percentage of the profits to the Woodstock refuge." The surprise on Trent's face was evident. "Why?" "Because some debts can't be paid with money," Whitney replied, a hand unconsciously touching her belly. "But we can try to make a difference for the future." Back in her room, Lily had begun reading one of the poems marked for Savannah, her childish voice breathing new life into the old words. "There is more courage in a hopeful smile than in 1,000 battles won, more strength in an outstretched hand than in all the walls built." Dr. Richardson watched the scene with teary eyes, decades of medical experience having not prepared him for the depth of this moment. Angela discreetly wiped away a tear as she adjusted the IV. "Trent," Savannah called when he returned to the room, "I want you to promise one more thing." "Anything," he replied, resuming his place beside her. "Promise you'll teach your son about true love," she pleaded, her eyes meeting his with surprising intensity. "Not the kind that owns or controls, but the kind that liberates and transforms." Whitney, still at the door, felt the words hit her heart like well-aimed arrows. Her son or daughter would carry the Harrison name, but now she understood that her true legacy must be Savannah's example. "And promise," Savannah continued, her voice getting weaker, "that the library will have a special section just for poetry. Because sometimes we need borrowed words to express what our hearts can't say." Lily, who had finished her reading, approached the bed with the innocence that only a child possesses. "When you become an angel, will you continue telling us stories?" A serene smile lit up Savannah's face. "The best stories, darling, are the ones we keep writing long after the book is finished." The morning sun now completely bathed the room, transforming the hospital environment into something almost ethereal. In the garden below, other oncology children were beginning to gather for their morning routine of therapeutic exercises, their voices rising like a gentle symphony of hope. The morning sun had given way to a soft rain that drummed against the window of room 507, creating a melancholy melody that seemed to lull Savannah's last moments. Heart monitors kept his rhythm increasingly irregular, while Dr. Richardson and his team moved with silent efficiency around the room. "The kids," Savannah murmured, her half-closed eyes focusing on something beyond the window. "I can hear them singing." Trent leaned in closer, realizing that there was indeed music coming from the floor below. Children from the oncology ward had gathered in the covered garden, braving the rain for a final tribute to the woman who had touched their lives so profoundly. Over the Rainbow. He recognized the melody, remembering how Savannah used to sing this song during her long nights at work. It was his way of remembering that there was always hope beyond the darkest clouds. Whitney remained in the hallway, watching the scene through the glass. His hands held a new folder of documents, the final papers transferring his interest in the Boston project to the Savannah Foundation. It was a small gesture given the magnitude of what had happened, but it represented his first genuine step toward redemption. "Mr. Harrison," Marcus called softly from the doorway. "Woodstock Architects just sent in revised plans." Trent nodded but didn't move from his spot next to Savannah. Every second was too precious to waste on floor plans and designs now. However, Savannah had other plans. "I want to see," she asked, her voice weak but determined. "One last time." Carefully, Marcus brought out the technical drawings, now incorporating all the suggestions Savannah had made over the months. The circular library, the sensory garden, the themed rooms, every detail a physical manifestation of her love for children fighting their own battles with cancer. "Perfect," she whispered, her fingers shaking slightly as they touched the paper. "It will be a place of healing, not just for bodies, but for souls." Lily appeared in the doorway, still in her treatment outfit, holding a new drawing. This time he had portrayed Savannah with angel wings, surrounded by smiling children under a starry sky. "Can I hang it here?" she asked shyly, "so everyone can see how beautiful Ms. Savannah will look in heaven." Angela, the nurse, helped Lily pin the drawing to the wall opposite the bed, where Savannah could see it clearly. The children's art contrasted poetically with the sterility of the hospital environment, adding a touch of magic to room 507. "Trent," Savannah called, her voice just a whisper. "Remember our first dance?" "On the unfinished terrace of the Harrison building," he replied, a sad smile playing on his lips. "You were terrified of the height. But I trusted you," she added, her eyes meeting his with surprising clarity. "I've always trusted." Dr. Richardson re-entered the room, his footsteps silent against the hospital floor. His experienced eye immediately noticed the subtle changes on the monitors. Time was running out. "The kids want to do one last performance," he informed softly. "If you're feeling strong enough." Savannah nodded, a smile lighting up her pale face. Soon, room 507 filled with little warriors in different stages of treatment, each carrying a colorful origami, a tradition that Savannah had started months ago. "Each paper bird carries a wish," she had once explained, "and when they all fly together, no wish will be left alone." The children began hanging their origami on a makeshift mobile that Angela helped put together. Vibrant colors danced with the gentle breeze from the air conditioning, creating a kaleidoscope of hope above the hospital bed. Whitney, still in the hallway, watched the scene with silent tears. Her son or daughter would never personally meet the woman who had inadvertently changed so many lives, but she silently promised that she would tell this story, not as a tragedy, but as a testament to the transformative power of true love. "Trent," Savannah called again, her voice growing weaker. "Promise you'll keep the music in the library." "Music?" he asked, confused. "Yes," she smiled. "Because some stories need to be sung, not just read." The children, as if responding to an invisible signal, began to softly sing "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" again. Their young voices blended in an imperfect but deeply moving harmony. Dr. Richardson checked the monitors once more, exchanging a meaningful look with Angela. The moment was approaching, but there was an almost tangible peace in the air, as if room 507 had been transformed into a portal between two worlds. "Savannah," Trent whispered, holding her hand gently. "I love you. I always have. Forgive me for forgetting this along the way." "There's nothing to forgive," she replied, her eyes focusing on the paper birds dancing above her head. "Just promise you'll continue the story, our story, through them." She gestured lightly toward the children, who continued singing, their young voices carrying hope and innocence, even in the face of their own struggles. The rain outside had eased, and a ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, creating a rainbow that seemed to touch the window of room 507. It was as if the universe was offering its own tribute to the woman who had dedicated her final days to spreading light in the lives of others. Room 507 at Greenwich Hospital had been transformed into a sanctuary of memories and promise in the early hours of that morning. The origami birds danced softly over Savannah's bed, their colorful shadows casting themselves on the white walls like a silent farewell dance. Trent held his wife's hand with the delicacy of touching a rose petal, feeling each beat through their intertwined fingers. The children from the oncology ward had gathered in the hallway, their young voices softly belting out the last notes of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. "Trent," Savannah whispered, her voice as soft as the brush of butterfly wings. "Look at them, each carrying their own battle yet still singing of hope." Dr. Richardson remained close to the monitors, his professional expression masking the emotion that threatened to boil over. Years of medical experience had not prepared him to witness such a profoundly transformative farewell. "The plans for Woodstock," she continued, her eyes focusing on the architectural plans spread out on the side table. "Promise that every detail will be as we dreamed it. The tall windows to let in the sunlight, the curved bookshelves in the library." "Exactly how you drew it," Trent promised, his voice breaking. "Every color, every space. It will be your living legacy." Whitney, who was watching from the doorway, took a hesitant step into the room. In his hands he held a sealed envelope. "Mrs. Harrison," she called softly, I'd like you to know that the foundation is officially registered. All the documents were signed this morning." Savannah smiled weakly, extending her free hand towards the young woman. After a moment of hesitation, Whitney approached, accepting the offered gesture of peace. "Take care of him," Savannah whispered to Whitney. "Not as I did, but in your own way, and teach your child about the power of forgiveness." Lily, who had remained quietly in her corner of the room, approached the bed with another drawing, this time a representation of the Woodstock Library as she imagined it, with flying books and smiling children floating between the shelves. "It's going to be magical," the girl declared with the certainty that only a child possesses. "Like you always said books should be." Dr. Richardson checked the monitors once more, his face taking on a grave expression. Angela, the night nurse who had stayed over her shift, quietly began preparing the necessary equipment. "Trent," Savannah called, her voice now just a whisper. "Remember our first dance at Woodstock? When we got lost looking for that farmhouse?" "The rain started out of nowhere," he replied, a sad smile playing on his lips. "We ended up dancing on the porch of an abandoned house, soaked to the skin." "That's when I knew," she said, her eyes shining with surprising clarity. "I knew it didn't matter where we were as long as we were together." The kids in the hallway had started a new song, this time, Amazing Grace. Their young voices mingled with the sound of the rain that began to fall outside, creating a bittersweet symphony of farewell. Marcus entered the room silently, carrying a small wooden box that Savannah had requested the night before. Inside, dozens of letters, one for each child in the oncology ward, to be delivered at specific moments during their treatments. "For when you need extra courage," she explained weakly. "Words have power, Trent. Sometimes they're the only light we have in the darkness." The sun was beginning to rise, its first rays penetrating through the rain clouds, creating a light show that seemed to dance with the suspended origami birds. It was as if the sky itself was paying its respects. "It's time," Savannah whispered, her eyes focusing on something beyond the window. "I can see the Woodstock garden, the children playing, the books flying through the trees." Trent squeezed her hand gently, tears running freely down his face. "I'm going to build everything exactly like this, my love. It will be more beautiful than any skyscraper I've ever built." "Don't forget the music," she reminded him, her voice growing more distant. Because some stories need to be sung to be truly understood. The children in the hall, as if responding to a silent call, increased the volume of their singing. Their young voices filled the hospital with a hope that transcended the sadness of the moment. "Trent," Savannah called one last time, her eyes meeting his with a love that 17 years had failed to dim. "Promise you'll remember to dance in the rain sometimes. Life is too short to wait for the sun." And with these words, Savannah Harrison closed her eyes for the last time, a serene smile on her lips. The heart monitors sounded their final tone as the morning sun transformed the origami birds into a kaleidoscope of dancing colors. In the hallway, the children continued to sing, their voices carrying the promise that some stories never truly end. They only turn into new beginnings, into legacies of love that continue to echo through time, like an eternal dance in the rain.